In this session today, I want to focus on using our charcoal pencils. So the benefit of charcoal over a graphite pencil is that they are really, really well suited to very expressive drawings. And by expressive, I mean that they're not heavily detailed. They're really more suggestive of something. They tend to show more movement and more of the light and dark value contrasts within them. And they're really great for doing quick sketches on the go. So if you're sitting on the seashore and you want to capture a bird that is walking along in front of you, trying to pick things out of the surf, then using a charcoal pencil for a really quick sketch might be exactly what you need for that particular setting. So what I want to demonstrate today is number one, how to sharpen your charcoal pencils without using a pencil sharpener. So pencil sharpeners, I find, ruin my pencils more often than not. This is true of pastel pencils and woodless graphite and, especially things that you can't necessarily put into a pencil sharpener, like the Peel and Sketch charcoal. Now, you might not necessarily need this to be pointy, but I wear them down typically to a very flat surface, and it's not exactly how I want to work with it often. So I will create at least somewhat of a point on them so that I have more control over where that charcoal's going. So I'm going to start with showing you that, and all you will need for that process is a box cutter or a knife of some sort. I like the box cutters because they fold in very, very nicely, and they usually have some sort of a safety mechanism on them. And then when they get dull, I can change out the razor blades that are in them, versus if you're using like a pocket knife or something like that. When it gets dull, it has to be sharpened by somebody who knows how to sharpen knives. I want to do that first, and then we'll move into some really expressive drawings of, well, I have a stick here, but I want to show you how you can take something like this and expand it to make an image of a tree by simply using your imagination. And then I also want to dive into some willow charcoal. So we'll talk about that right after we do our sharpening. Now, this is a sketchy process here, so use at your own discretion there, and always carve away from yourself. So this is kind of like whittling, if you've ever whittled anything before. So you want to keep it really light. You're not trying to carve everything out all at one time, and you're just going to slowly turn your pencil while you are carving away the wood. So I managed to get this pencil all the way down to the nub before I'm doing this. And it is possible to scrape away really lightly until you get a point. But after this, after I get the wood carved away, I'm going to show you a really easier, a much easier way to create that point or that pointier point on the top of your charcoal pencil or colored pencil that you're looking for. So I've carved away about a little more than 1/4 of an inch. And like I said, I can continue turning this and scraping away at the charcoal pencil until, and I'm doing it very lightly, until it becomes a point, or I can use some sandpaper. So this is 100 grit, and all I'm gonna do is move my charcoal pencil back and forth. On the sandpaper, you do lose some of your charcoal when you do that. But you can tap it off into a bowl if you like and use it as a loose charcoal. So I've got a pretty decent point there. I think I'm just going to scrape away a little bit more with the pencil. Or I'm sorry, with my box cutter. Really sharp little pocket knives work really well for this as well. And again, you can keep this in a bowl. Tap that off over onto the side here. And I'll probably put that into a little container to use as a loose charcoal. And you can see I have a nice sharp point. Can get a really thin line. And again, I'm going to do that once more. So I have this peel and sketch charcoal that I've worn to the nub. And I'm going to make it much pointier. So I've already pulled off the paper to expose the area that I want to sharpen. And I'm just turning the pencil while I do that. But I do want to preserve that loose charcoal because you can do some really beautiful effects with that. So I have a relatively sharp point here, and I'm getting a much nicer, more controllable point on the end of my pencil here. Okay, I'd like to start, I think, with the Willow Charcoal. And if you take a look at this, you can see that it is a kind of a curved piece of charcoal here. It is very, very light, and how they make these are from branches that they heat to a really high temperature in a fire or a kiln, or I'm not exactly sure how they do it. I only know that my son made me some willow charcoal at one point. We had taken down a a willow tree in our backyard, and he stuffed a metal tube full of all of these branches and then put it into a bonfire that we were having, and he just kept turning it and rotating it and turning it, and eventually everything inside became very, very, very dark, very brittle, and basically turned into charcoal. Now, their process of making willow charcoal might be a little bit different. This seems a bit more compressed and uniform in size. It's just basically a branch, a willow branch that is heated to very high temperature to where it just kind of turns into this carbon piece of charcoal. So these are particularly great for creating really, really loose and expressive drawings. So I'm using this this little root, this little branch that I have over here as an example. I'm not worrying about making it exactly like this is with all of its little flaws and imperfections. I'm simply going to use this as a reference of how to go about creating my expressive drawing here. So I feel that this branch or root or whatever it is very expressive all on its own. I love how imperfectly it moves. I love all of the indentations and the color changes that happen along. I love how it curls and it sways and it scoops, and I just think it's the coolest branch ever, which is why I picked it up shoreline somewhere, wherever it was that I was. So I want to try to capture a bit of this with my willow charcoal, and I'm going to start by just simply holding the willow way at the end, holding it very, very lightly, and I'm not choking down on it like I'm drawing with a pencil. I want this to be expressive, so I'm just using this lightly on my page, and I'm not even really looking at this paper as I'm drawing here. I'm looking at my piece over here. And I'm almost doing a continuous line drawing where you don't actually lift your pencil or your charcoal from the paper. You simply let it rest. And as the charcoal turns and wears down in certain areas, you'll get thicker lines. And I'm allowing the charcoal to turn in my fingers. And I'm even using a little bit of creative license here and creating some extended branches that aren't necessarily there. So I'm using this as an idea of like a jumping off point to creating a tree. And I imagine that this tree is very ancient. I'm going to give it some little roots down here. And you don't necessarily have to keep the charcoal on the paper the entire time. If you're not comfortable doing that, that's okay. Pick it up, do some other things. But as I'm just simply moving this charcoal up and down this page, I'm finding that it's creating some incredibly beautiful marks in my tree. So that is a very, very expressive tree. And it probably took me a whole of like 3 or 4 minutes to do that. So I'm just simply drawing from this little piece. You can see the original piece that kind of spurred everything else that came from it. And I feel that this could be added to very, very easily to make it into a very well-structured tree that has lived in the forest for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands. So I love those trees. They have so much character. The ones that are all crooked and have areas where things have fallen off or broken off or got cut off. Just love those. So you can start with something like this and widen it up to make your tree trunk more established. So some of those older trees, of course, are going to have thicker, wider trunks. So you can easily add that in afterwards from your original drawing. Thicken up some branches that you think need to be thickened up. You could even add in some squirrels if you wanted to. There's some birds. Okay. So nice and quick sketch. It doesn't have to be complicated. We're just capturing something in the moment. I love this. I'm going to give it a quick little spray of the fixative. If you don't have fixative, it's okay. Use an aerosol hairspray, or you can simply put a piece of tissue paper or something over it before you turn your page. But charcoal transfers to the next surface very, very easily. So at least spray it with something or put tissue over it before you go on to the next thing. So I want to take that last sketch that I did and use it as a jumping off point So I'm coming from this, from my small journal, which is meant to do preliminary sketches and to get some ideas to test things out. So this is kind of like your little art journal that is just for you, and then you can use what you create in that journal to make a much larger piece. So starting with this this little root that I have here in my preliminary sketch. So I'm going to start with the Willow Charcoal to just kind of get some really basic lines, and then I'm going to come in with some of my other charcoal pieces to create this idea of it being a tree. That's a little bit more than what I have in my smaller journal piece here. So again, you can keep your original or the one that you've created. That's actually off to the side here. I have this piece, but I think I'll keep my little stick here as a reference. So I have some really basic lines here for my tree, and I want to give it a greater depth. So while I believe that this is expressive, possibly not as crooked as I would like, I want to move on to some charcoal pencils. I have my favorites. Now I will keep the medium and the hard nearby. They aren't charcoal pencils that I typically use, but I have my woodless graphite here, which is really really dark, and it's great for adding in some darker areas. So in trees, I like to create these shadowier areas, and putting that in is going to give the impression that it's moving back a bit in space. And I can also use it to kind of round these transitions from where the branches that come off of other branches, they don't create like a complete V. They actually transition into the branch, usually with a U kind of a thing like this. Okay, so you have your main branch, And then where it attaches, it's wider at the base than it is out. So another thing that I love to put into my trees is those knots that inevitably happen when it loses a limb or when an animal has decided to live there. I think it adds great character to your trees. And from where they break off, you can usually see a suggestion of rings inside of that. Now for this process, you can use a dark charcoal, or you could even bring in that mechanical pencil. But I suggest that you maybe use a bunch of different types of things. So varying the types of charcoal or the types of pencils or graphite that you use in a piece is going to make it far more interesting, I think. So I'm creating some of these transitions of where the branches branch off. And we like some knots down around their knees as well. And I'm just going to do it really lightly with this really really soft charcoal. To kind of give it some background, and then come in with something maybe a little bit detailed, or maybe we'll just leave it really loose. But if some of your branches don't look right, so they don't look proportioned right, you can always add more to your branches. Just like that. And if you don't hold on to your graphite or your charcoal like you've got a death grip, it will waver a lot more for you, and it'll be a lot more expressive than it might be if you're holding on too tightly. Okay. Adjusting some lines here. So this is a very soft charcoal, which is fine, but it gives it kind of not a real defined look to it. And where it comes down into its root system, it really shows if you put something like this in here, where they're kind of like half rings, it shows that expanding of that root or that tree beneath the surface of the ground. So you imagine your ground is here, and this is below the surface or kind of crawling along the surface. And it spreads out. Okay, so I'm about done with the soft charcoal here. Just a couple more little pieces here for unity or continuity. All right. I believe this graphite is pretty similar. It's maybe a little bit more detailed, and it might come back in pretty soon, but I'm going to set it aside for right now. And I think I'm going to use the soft charcoal pencil that I have here. This Winsor Newton. It's fairly sharp. And I want to just put in some thinner lines in my tree. And I might have gone a little bit far with the softer charcoal, but I'm just adding some lines into this tree. That's going to define some areas, maybe a little bit more than it would have with something softer. So again, the lines that are going to go around where that tree has lost its branch, they're going to be wider right where the loss occurred, and then they get smaller as they go up the tree. And they become just kind of this little suggestion of lines. I do that also in the crooks of the trees sometimes, like here. And then travel some of them up into that branch. All right. So this is a good opportunity to use these finer lines to create a little bit of definition, maybe around your edge, if you feel that it's a little bit too soft. That inevitably happen. They start to grow, and for whatever reason, they just don't make it. So you can add in something like that. And then always step back and kind of assess the whole thing. So like right up here, this is kind of a wide area. I think this is too narrow. And this may need to kind of come in here and create another little area here. That is part of the trunk. So I'm gonna call this probably pretty done for right now. And what I would like to do, just to finish it up, is to possibly move around some of this charcoal with a little bit of water. And I'm definitely being careful to stay inside the tree. You don't want to get outside of it, because that probably wouldn't look very realistic, I wouldn't think. And I'm not doing it all. I'm simply adding a little bit. Into, especially maybe here, to just give it a bit of a washy look through here. I don't have a lot of water. That was too much on my brush. And I don't want to obliterate everything, so I'm just barely touching some various areas. To maybe help them to blend a little bit, or to make them darker.